When most people think about nightmares, they picture them as mental glitches, a kind of nighttime error message. Mainstream psychology often defines them as intense, disturbing dreams that cause you to wake up in fear, often linked to stress, trauma, or an overactive imagination. That's the common, surface-level explanation. Carl Jung's view was much deeper and far more personal. In Jungian psychology, a nightmare is not just a bad dream. It is a deliberate act of communication from your unconscious mind. Where mainstream psychology often looks for the external triggers, a stressful job, a scary movie, or unresolved trauma, Jung looked for the internal meaning. He saw nightmares as purposeful, symbolic narratives designed to bypass your conscious defenses and deliver a truth you've been avoiding. To understand this difference, we need to make a distinction between bad dreams and symbolic nightmares. A bad dream is like emotional weather, uncomfortable, yes, but passing. Maybe you had a stressful day and your mind is just working out the tension in your sleep. You wake up a little unsettled, but by breakfast it's forgotten. A symbolic nightmare, on the other hand, is like a telegram from the depths of your psyche. It stays with you. It demands your attention. It feels charged with something more than just random brain activity. And that's because it is. The imagery is often vivid, surreal, and emotionally intense, not because your mind is malfunctioning, but because your unconscious is trying to get through to you using the only language it knows: symbols, metaphors, and archetypes. But why fear? Why not send the message in a pleasant dream, a beautiful scene, or a comforting image? Jung's answer was both simple and profound. Fear gets your attention. Your unconscious mind isn't trying to torture you, it's trying to wake you up. Fear is the red flashing light, agent of the psyche. In your waking life, you can ignore a gentle nudge, a passing thought, or a subtle sign. But in the realm of dreams, when fear grips you, you remember, you can't look away. The emotional intensity of a nightmare forces you to face something you might otherwise avoid for years. Think about it this way. If you're standing in a room and someone whispers your name, you might not even turn around. But if someone shouts it in desperation, your whole body reacts instantly. A nightmare is the shout. It's the psychic equivalent of your mind saying, "We cannot ignore this any longer." Let's bring this to life with a relatable example. Imagine this. You find yourself standing in the middle of a vast, dark forest. The trees are impossibly tall, their branches clawing at the night sky. You can barely see the path beneath your feet, but you feel you must keep moving. Suddenly, you hear it. Footsteps behind you. Slow at first, then quicker. You start to run. The sound follows. Your heart is pounding. Your breath comes in short, sharp bursts. You don't know who or what is chasing you. You just know you can't let it catch you. You break into a clearing, only to find a cliff edge. You look down, an endless drop into darkness. You turn back, and a shadowy figure emerges from the trees. You can't make out a face, but somehow you know it's been waiting for you. Your legs won't move. You're frozen. The figure comes closer, and you wake up, drenched in sweat, pulse racing. Now, in a purely mainstream psychological reading, this might be explained as a stress dream, perhaps tied to feeling chased by deadlines or obligations. But Jung's analysis would dig deeper. He would ask, who is the shadowy figure? What part of you does it represent? Why is it appearing now? In Jungian terms, the figure could be your shadow, the side of yourself you've ignored or denied, the key. Hazi might symbolize your avoidance of some truth or responsibility. The cliff edge could represent the fear of change, the terror of stepping into the unknown, and the paralysis. That's the psychic standstill you've reached, because you can neither keep running from yourself, nor take the leap into transformation. Seen through this lens, the nightmare is no longer just a frightening experience. It's a story about you, crafted by your own mind. The forest is your unconscious. The shadow figure is your unacknowledged truth. The chase is your avoidance. And the cliff is the moment of choice your life is bringing you to. This is why Jung treated nightmares with such respect. They were not nuisances to be forgotten. They were vital messages, even sacred in a way. And unlike bad dreams that fade in the morning light, symbolic nightmares tend to linger. They are heavy with emotional weight because they are pointing to something central, something that needs your attention for you to grow. Jung often compared dreams to letters from the unconscious. If a bad dream is like a casual note, a nightmare is like an urgent letter stamped, "Read immediately." And if you throw it away without reading it, the unconscious will send it again, maybe in a different form, maybe more intense, maybe recurring night after night, until you finally face it. Understanding this shifts the way you experience nightmares. Instead of seeing them as enemies, you start to see them as messengers, sometimes harsh, but always with a purpose. Fear, in this context, is not just a byproduct of the dream. It's part of the delivery system, the emotional glue that makes the message stick. In the chapters ahead, we'll explore not just how to decode these messages, but also how to respond to them. Because once you realize that nightmares are purposeful, not random, you begin to see them as opportunities for insight, healing, and profound self-discovery. And that's the first truth Carl Jung would want you to know. Your nightmares aren't here to hurt you. They're here to wake you up. Psyche. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This statement lies at the heart of his dream analysis, and it is especially true when we talk about nightmares. To understand why your mind sends you terrifying images in the middle of the night, we first need to understand where those images come from. The vast inner territory Jung called the unconscious. In Jung's model of the psyche, the unconscious is not just a dumping ground for forgotten memories, as some early psychologists imagined. It's a living, breathing part of your mind, active, intelligent, and deeply connected to your emotional and spiritual life. It operates beyond your day-to-day awareness, influencing your decisions, feelings, and even the way you see yourself. Jung divided the unconscious into two main layers, the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious. The personal unconscious is unique to you. It's made up of all the memories, experiences, and emotions you've accumulated in your life but are not actively thinking about right now. Some of these memories are simply forgotten, like what you ate for lunch 3 years ago. Others are repressed, pushed down intentionally or unintentionally because they are painful, shameful, or too overwhelming to face at the time. This is where we start to see the connection to nightmares. When fears, hurts, or unresolved conflicts are repressed, they don't vanish. They sit quietly in the personal unconscious, influencing you from the shadows. Nightmares often act as release valves for these buried emotions, bringing them to the surface in symbolic form. For example, you might have a recurring nightmare of being trapped in a small, dark room. On the surface, it's just claustrophobia, but under Jung's lens, that dark room might represent an emotional situation from your past, perhaps a childhood environment where you felt restricted, silenced, or powerless. Your conscious mind may have long moved on, but your unconscious is still holding the emotional imprint. If the personal unconscious is like your own private memory vault, the collective unconscious is the shared memory of all humankind. This was one of Jung's most revolutionary and controversial ideas. He believed that beneath our individual experiences lies a deep reservoir of inherited knowledge and universal symbols, which he called archetypes. These archetypes show up in myths, fairy tales, religious stories, and, yes, in our dreams. You may never have read a certain legend or seen a particular piece of art, but you can still dream about an old wise man, a menacing shadow, a nurturing mother figure, or a hero's journey, because these images are part of the human blueprint. Nightmares often pull from this collective imagery. That's why people across cultures and centuries have reported similar dream themes: falling, being chased, losing teeth, encountering monsters, drowning, or being unprepared for a critical task. These aren't random coincidences. They are universal psychic patterns expressing themselves through your sleeping mind. Now let's connect this to why nightmares feel so personal, yet so archetypal. The unconscious mind, personal and collective, doesn't speak in plain words. It speaks in images and symbols. When you repress a fear or avoid a difficult truth, the unconscious doesn't just delete it. Instead, it waits for a chance to show you what you're missing. If the wound is personal, the imagery will draw from your own life. If the wound touches something universal, like fear of abandonment, loss of identity, or facing mortality, it may tap into archetypes that humanity has shared for millennia. This is why a nightmare can feel both intimately yours and strangely timeless at the same time. A classic example: many adults have nightmares about being back in school, facing an exam they haven't prepared for. On the personal level, it might connect to a specific time in your youth when you felt judged or unprepared. On the collective level, it resonates with the archetypal fear of public failure, the terror of not measuring up, something humans have felt in different forms across all societies. One of Jung's key observations was that childhood experiences, especially emotionally charged or unresolved ones, become some of the deepest material in the personal unconscious. If something happens to you in childhood that you can't process fully, it often gets buried. And because children are so impressionable, those early wounds tend to take root more deeply than those from adulthood. This is why nightmares so often revisit childhood landscapes, faces, and fears. You may dream of your childhood home, but the furniture is wrong. You may see a teacher from decades ago, or a parent whose expression is unusually cold or distorted. The unconscious uses these figures not because it's stuck in the past, but because those early events formed the emotional DNA of your current patterns. Imagine your unconscious like a skilled theater director. It casts familiar actors in symbolic roles to make sure you recognize the emotional tone of the story, even if the plot doesn't literally match your waking life. That's why a nightmare might blend your old-school playground with your current workplace, or put your childhood pet in the middle of a futuristic city. The unconscious is bending time and space to make its message hit home. And here's where it gets powerful. Nightmares, for Jung, weren't just about identifying fears. They were invitations, sometimes demands, to engage in shadow work. The shadow is Jung's term for the parts of ourselves we hide, deny, or reject, our unaccepted emotions, impulses, or traits. The shadow is not inherently evil. It's simply the unintegrated parts of our psyche. And here's the truth. Your unconscious wants you to integrate them, because only then can you become whole. Nightmares often contain shadow material. The monster chasing you might represent anger you've never expressed. The collapsing building might symbolize a belief system that's crumbling under the weight of truth. The drowning sensation might be the emotional flood you've kept dammed up for years. If we see nightmares only as threats, we miss their potential. But if we see them as shadow messengers, they become some of the most valuable dreams we can have. They hold the key to the locked rooms in our psyche, the rooms where our unclaimed power and our deepest healing reside. The bridge is now built. Once you understand the personal and collective unconscious and how repressed material takes symbolic form, you're ready to approach your nightmares not as enemies, but as guides. Carl Jung believed that every human being walks with a hidden companion, a figure made not of flesh and blood, but of all the parts of ourselves we do not wish to see. He called it the shadow. At first glance, the word shadow might make you think of something dark, sinister, even evil. And yes, the shadow can contain destructive impulses, our anger, jealousy, cruelty, selfishness. But it also holds things that are not inherently bad, like ambition, confidence, sensuality, or creativity. Traits we may have been taught to suppress because they didn't fit the image we thought we had to maintain. In Jung's eyes, the shadow is everything about yourself that you've disowned. It is the unloved twin of your conscious self-image. And while we can ignore it in waking life, the unconscious, especially through dreams, never stops trying to bring it to our attention. This is why nightmares are so often the stage where the shadow walks right into our awareness. If dreams are the language of the unconscious, then nightmares are the urgent letters, the ones written in bold red ink, demanding we open them. In a nightmare, the shadow might not always appear as you in an obvious way. It often wears a mask, a stranger who terrifies you, an animal you fear but can't escape, a monstrous version of yourself, a loved one acting in a disturbing alien manner, a chaotic force, like a tornado, fire, or collapsing structure, that feels both threatening and strangely personal. The shadow doesn't come to torment you for the sake of cruelty. It comes because your conscious mind has rejected something it considers unacceptable, and the unconscious insists on holding it up to the light. In Jung's framework, integration of the shadow is essential for psychological wholeness. Because the shadow draws from both the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious, its appearances often carry archetypal qualities. Here are a few recurring shadow archetypes Jungians often see in nightmares. The dark stranger, a faceless or half-hidden figure pursuing you, represents repressed traits or emotions you've been running from, often anger, guilt, or desire. The monster can be grotesque or supernatural, symbolizes primal instincts or impulses you fear acknowledging, perhaps aggression, lust, or the urge to dominate. The betrayer, a friend, partner, or family member who suddenly turns hostile in your dream, often mirrors your own feelings of betrayal, either toward yourself for not living authentically or toward others. The double doppelganger, a dream character who looks like you but behaves in disturbing ways. This is the most direct encounter with the shadow, confronting you with traits you deny in yourself. The wild animal, wolves, snakes, tigers, predatory animals in nightmares often embody instincts you've suppressed, especially around survival, sexuality, or raw emotional honesty. The fear in these nightmares is real because the shadow is us, but it's the us we've buried. Seeing it feels like encountering a stranger in our own home. We fear the shadow because we've been taught it's wrong, shameful, or dangerous. Yet Jung argued that the opposite is true. The more we reject the shadow, the more it operates unconsciously, influencing our choices without our awareness. The nightmare is the psyche's way of saying, "You cannot ignore me forever." When you run from a shadow figure in a dream, you're symbolically running from yourself. When you fight a shadow figure, you're wrestling with the part of you that wants recognition. And when you're overwhelmed by a shadow figure, it reflects how powerless we can feel against emotions we've long denied. Let's walk through an example to see how this plays out. A woman named Claire came to Jungian analysis with a nightmare that had haunted her for over a decade. In it, she's walking home at night through an empty street. The air feels thick, almost electric, as though she's being watched. Then she hears footsteps, heavy, deliberate, behind her. She starts walking faster, but the footsteps match her pace. Panic rises. She breaks into a run, heart pounding, but the figure is always just a few steps behind. She never sees its face. Just before it catches her, she wakes up gasping. Over the years, Claire had this nightmare in different settings, sometimes a deserted train station, sometimes a forest path, but the pattern never changed. The presence, the chase, the terror, the awakening. From a Jungian perspective, the faceless pursuer was a classic shadow figure. The fact that it never revealed its face meant Claire had not yet been willing or able to confront what it represented. The chase symbolized her avoidance of an important truth. Through analysis, Claire realized the pursuer represented her own suppressed anger. Growing up in a household where expressing anger was punished, she had learned to swallow it completely. Outwardly, she was calm, agreeable, and accommodating. Inwardly, resentment built like steam in a sealed kettle. Her shadow, this buried anger, had been following her for years, trying to catch her attention. The nightmare wasn't a warning of outside danger. It was an eye, and her call to stop running and finally face the feelings she had labeled unacceptable. When Claire began to work with her anger consciously, allowing herself to express frustration in healthy ways, the nightmare began to change. One night, instead of running, she turned around to face the figure. In the dream, it stopped too. Slowly, it lifted its hood, and there was her own face, staring back, but with eyes full of fire. That was the beginning of integration. The nightmare lost its grip because its message had been received. The key takeaway here is that the shadow isn't the enemy. The fear you feel in a nightmare is often the fear of seeing yourself more fully. When you begin to engage with the shadow, even in imagination, the dream's tone can shift from pure terror to something more mysterious, even transformative. Jung encouraged dreamers not to banish their nightmare figures, but to interact with them, in dreams if possible, or in waking life through active imagination and journaling. Ask the shadow what it wants. Listen to its story. Often you will find it's not there to destroy you, but to return a part of you that you abandoned long ago. When we dream, especially when we dream in fear, we are not only confronting personal memories and private emotions, we are also stepping into a far older and deeper layer of the mind, what Carl Jung called the collective unconscious. In this realm live the archetypes, universal patterns of human experience that appear in myths, folklore, religion, and art across all cultures and eras. They are the ancient characters and forces that humanity has been imagining and fearing for thousands of years. When they show up in our nightmares, they bring with them a power that is far greater than a fleeting image from the day's events. Archetypes are not invented by us as individuals. They are inherited psychic structures, the DNA of the human imagination. Because they are ancient and universal, they bypass rational thought entirely and go straight to the emotional core. When an archetype appears in a nightmare, it doesn't just frighten you, it resonates with every ancestral story you've absorbed subconsciously. This is why an image like a monstrous predator or a dark hooded figure can terrify you instantly, even if you've never encountered such a thing in your waking life. Your body and mind recognize these symbols on a deep, instinctual level. Among the many archetypes that can appear in dreams, 3 are especially common in nightmares: the monster, the dark stranger, and the fallen hero. Each carries a unique psychological meaning, and each can be found echoed in cultural myths and personal dream reports throughout history. The monster archetype is one of the most potent, whether it takes the form of a grotesque creature, a supernatural beast, or a formless alien presence. The monster embodies primal forces we fear we cannot control. In Jungian terms, the monster often represents our untamed instincts, unacknowledged rage, or suppressed desires. It can also symbolize overwhelming aspects of authority figures in childhood, the devouring parent who smothers rather than nurtures. Sometimes, the monster is a piece of our own shadow that we've neglected for so long it has grown distorted and threatening. Culturally, we see the monster everywhere: dragons in medieval legends, sea serpents in Norse sagas, and modern horror icons like zombies or alien predators. A man might dream of being trapped in a narrow alley as a huge eyeless creature crawls toward him, its mouth lined with endless rows of teeth. In analysis, he discovers that the monster is his own suppressed ambition, a force he rejected through, or fear of appearing selfish, now returning in terrifying form to demand recognition. The dark stranger is another recurring figure in nightmares. Unlike the monster, the stranger is recognizably human, yet their humanity is veiled in secrecy. They might be faceless, masked, or always just out of clear view. Symbolically, the dark stranger often represents the shadow self, a disowned aspect of one's personality, or the unknown future, those unpredictable events we fear but cannot prepare for. Sometimes, the stranger embodies the trickster archetype, an agent of chaos who disrupts life and forces transformation. In folklore, we find the man in black, the cloaked wanderer on the crossroads, or the mysterious visitor whose motives are unclear. Modern cinema gives us masked villains and quiet figures in the corner of the frame who seem to know more than they should. A woman might dream she's walking through a busy train station and sees a tall man in a long coat watching her from across the platform. His face is hidden in shadow. Every time she moves, he moves too, always just at the edge of her vision. In therapy, she realizes he represents her unacknowledged grief over a breakup, emotions she kept in the shadows for years. The fallen hero is perhaps the most tragic of nightmare archetypes. This is not a monster or stranger from the start, but a figure who once embodied hope, strength, or goodness, only to become corrupted or broken. In nightmares, the fallen hero may appear as a beloved mentor behaving cruelly, a famous figure you admire turning against you, or even a younger version of yourself who is injured or morally compromised. Symbolically, this archetype points to the loss of faith in ideals, disillusionment with role models, or betrayal of one's own moral code. Mythology gives us Lucifer's fall from heaven, King Arthur's tragic decline, or Anakin Skywalker's transformation into Darth Vader. In dreams, a man might encounter his childhood sports hero, now homeless, drunk, and shouting insults at him in the street. Upon reflection, he sees this mirrors his own feelings of falling from grace after losing a job, a collapse of the confident identity he once carried. These archetypes trigger such primal fear because they work on the oldest parts of the brain, the limbic system, which governs our fight-or-flight responses. You don't have to figure them out for them to affect you. Your body already knows what they mean. The monster provokes the instinct to fight or flee from a predator. The dark stranger awakens the vigilance we evolved to survive threats from other humans. The fallen hero cuts deeper, threatening not the body, but the soul, the collapse of trust and meaning that underpins our sense of self. Jung believed that when we recognize an archetype in a dream, we can begin to interact with it consciously. This does not mean destroying or ignoring it, but engaging with it as a messenger. Through techniques like active imagination, where you visualize and speak to the dream figure, or by journaling from the figure's perspective, you can uncover the message it carries. Drawing or painting the archetype can also help bring its energy into conscious awareness, turning the nightmare from a source of terror into a source of insight. By facing the archetypes that haunt our dreams, we learn that they are not simply villains or random fears. They are living symbols, each carrying a fragment of ourselves that seeks recognition and integration. And when we are willing to meet them, we find that what once seemed purely threatening can become a powerful ally in our psychological growth. If there is one type of dream that can feel truly inescapable, it is the recurring nightmare. You know the kind. The same terrifying chase, the same fall into darkness, the same impossible exam you've forgotten to study for. These dreams can return again and again, sometimes over months, sometimes or decades, each time leaving you with the same hollow feeling in your chest when you wake. To Jung, these were not random accidents of the sleeping mind. They were deliberate signals from the unconscious, designed to demand our attention when we have stubbornly avoided something vital in waking life. Mainstream psychology often frames recurring nightmares as a symptom of stress, trauma, or sleep disorders. And while these factors can certainly play a role, Jungian psychology adds another layer. Recurring dreams are unfinished psychological business. They persist because a deep inner conflict has not been resolved. Like an unpaid bill that keeps arriving in the mail, the unconscious will continue sending the same message, packaged in the same frightening imagery, until the recipient finally opens it and reads what's inside. The unconscious does not repeat itself out of cruelty. It repeats itself because repetition is one of the most effective ways to break through conscious resistance. Our waking mind is skilled at avoidance. We distract ourselves, justify our actions, and cling to comfortable narratives. But the dream state bypasses these defenses. When the same scenario plays out night after night, the dreamer is eventually forced to confront it. The nightmare becomes a kind of ritual confrontation, asking, "Will you listen now?" Jung described these dreams as invitations to engage with a psychic process that is stuck. Sometimes that process involves a fear we refuse to face, a truth we do not want to admit, or a decision we cannot bring ourselves to make. The recurring nightmare becomes a living metaphor for that paralysis. In this sense, the nightmare's purpose is not to harm, but to awaken. Consider the nightmare of being chased. Many people report dreams in which they are pursued by a faceless attacker, unable to escape, running through endless streets or halls. As in Jungian interpretation, the pursuer often represents an aspect of the dreamer's own psyche, usually a disowned or shadow part. The repetition occurs because the dreamer continues to run instead of turning to face the pursuer. The moment they confront the figure, either in the dream or through waking reflection, the dream often changes or stops entirely. The unconscious is satisfied because the message has been received. Symbolic repetition is the unconscious mind's language for emphasis. Just as a teacher might underline a sentence on the board 3 times, the psyche uses recurring imagery to signal importance. To decode these repetitions, it is helpful to notice what changes and what stays the same. For example, perhaps in your recurring nightmare, you are always in a burning building. That is the constant, but in some versions you are alone, while in others, a specific person is with you. These variations are clues, suggesting that while the core message remains, a burning situation that feels inescapable, your relationship to it is evolving. Jung often emphasized that recurring nightmares can have roots in early life experiences, especially those that were never fully processed. For example, a person who grew up in a chaotic household might have recurring dreams about being trapped in a war zone. The imagery is exaggerated, but the emotional core is the same, feeling unsafe and under constant threat. Until the dreamer addresses that original wound, through therapy, self-reflection, or life changes, the dream will keep returning like a relentless messenger. Let's explore a case study to bring this to life. A man in his late 30s, whom we'll call Daniel, came to therapy because he had been experiencing the same nightmare for over a decade. In the dream, Daniel is driving down a familiar road at night when he sees a sharp turn ahead. No matter how hard he turns the wheel, the car refuses to respond, and he skids off the road into a dark ravine. Every time, just before impact, he wakes in a sweat. At first, Daniel assumed the dream was about his fear of losing control in a literal car, but he had no driving anxiety in waking life. Through Jungian analysis, he began to see the car as a symbol for his life's direction. The unresponsive steering represented a feeling that his path was set by forces outside his control. When asked what was happening in his life when the dream first began, Daniel recalled that it was the year he took over his family's business, a choice he felt was made for him, not by him. The recurrence of the nightmare was his unconscious replaying the same message. You feel powerless, and you are headed somewhere you don't want to go. Once Daniel acknowledged this truth, the dream began to shift. In later versions, he noticed that the brakes began to work, or the road was lit more clearly. Within a year of making changes in his career, the nightmare stopped altogether. Not all recurring nightmares end so neatly, but they often transform once their symbolic message is understood. This is one of Jung's key points. The goal is not to banish the dream, but to evolve with it. A nightmare that once filled you with terror can become a guidepost, marking your progress and self-awareness. Sometimes the repetition is more subtle, not the exact same dream, but the same theme. You might dream of being trapped in different buildings, chased by different creatures, or trying to save different people. But the emotional tone is always the same: helplessness, fear, urgency. In Jungian work, these thematic patterns are just as important as exact repetition. They reveal the emotional landscape your unconscious is urging you to explore. Recurring nightmares also serve a function in shadow work. The psyche may present the same frightening image repeatedly as a way of gradually increasing your tolerance for it. The first time you see the shadow figure, you wake instantly in panic. The 10th time, you might manage to stay in the dream longer, observing details you missed before. This is not just desensitization, it is psychological integration. You are slowly building the courage to meet yourself. In this light, recurring nightmares are less like curses and more like unfinished conversations. The unconscious is knocking on the same door, night after night, not to torment you, but because there is something on the other side you need to retrieve. If you keep slamming the door, the knocking gets louder. If you open it, the figure may still be frightening, but at least the mystery ends. The key is to approach these dreams with curiosity rather than avoidance. Keep a dream journal and write down each recurrence, noting what is the same and what has changed. Ask yourself, what am I running from? What am I avoiding saying or doing in waking life? And remember Jung's advice: whatever you resist will persist. The moment you stop resisting, you can begin to reshape the dream and your life. Nightmares are often dismissed as irrational, chaotic hallucinations born from stress, indigestion, or an overactive imagination. But throughout human history, people have also seen them as warnings. Ancient cultures believed that troubling dreams could foretell disasters, signal illness, or reveal betrayals. Carl Jung approached this idea with a nuanced lens. While not every nightmare is prophetic, some do act as a kind of guidance system, alerting us to threats, both literal and psychological, before we consciously register them. In Jung's view, the unconscious mind is not bound by the same narrow awareness as the waking ego. It absorbs subtle cues we might consciously overlook: a friend's changing tone of voice, a growing tension in a relationship, a subtle decline in our health. These impressions may not form a coherent thought in daylight, but in dreams, they take symbolic form. A nightmare, in this sense, can be the psyche's way of saying, something is wrong, pay attention. The distinction Jung made is crucial. There are literal warnings and symbolic warnings. A literal warning is when the dream points directly toward a real-world danger. This might be a health issue, a risky situation, or a threat from another person. A symbolic warning, on the other hand, uses fear-based imagery to highlight an internal imbalance or a self-destructive path. Both are urgent, but they must be interpreted differently. Literal warnings often arise from the body's own intelligence. For example, there are documented cases of people dreaming vividly about having a heart attack, only to later discover they had underlying cardiovascular disease. The unconscious can pick up on subtle physical symptoms, long before conscious awareness does, translating them into terrifying scenarios that jolt the dreamer into taking action. Jung acknowledged this somatic link, noting that the unconscious often mirrors the state of the body in its dream imagery. Symbolic warnings are more common, and they operate on the level of meaning rather than prediction. Imagine dreaming that you're crossing a bridge and it suddenly collapses beneath you. In the symbolic language of the psyche, the bridge might represent a fragile plan, a shaky relationship, or a risky venture in waking life. The nightmare's warning is not that a literal bridge will collapse, but that something in your life cannot support the weight you're placing on it. To illustrate the power of nightmares as warnings, Claire's nightmare had been a literal warning. Whether it was her unconscious mind picking up subtle sensory cues while she slept, or something more mysterious, the fact remains. Paying attention to the dream may have saved her life. Jung would have seen this as a perfect example of the unconscious performing a protective function. It does not matter whether the smoke was sensed physically or symbolically. What matters is that the dreamer listened. This, in Jung's words, is the correct attitude towards such dreams, not superstition, but attentive curiosity. But the challenge is that not all nightmares are so straightforward. In fact, many symbolic warnings can feel just as urgent as literal ones, and misinterpreting them can lead to confusion. If we assume every dream is a prophecy, we fall into paranoia. If we dismiss them all as meaningless, we risk ignoring a critical signal. The key is discernment, and this is where dream journaling and self-reflection become invaluable tools. Jung often advised looking for life parallels. If a nightmare's imagery connects directly to a situation in waking life, chances are you're dealing with a symbolic warning. If the imagery is oddly specific and tied to physical sensations, smells, tastes, bodily pain, it may be more literal. But either way, the dream is asking for action, whether that action is a doctor's visit or a hard conversation with yourself. Consider another example. A young man named Marcus kept dreaming that he was standing on a stage, about to give a speech, when suddenly the floor beneath him began to crack. He'd watch helplessly as the stage gave way, and he fell into a dark void. Marcus was not afraid of public speaking, nor was he preparing for a speech. But through dream work, he realized the stage symbolized his career, one he had built on external validation rather than authentic passion. The warning was that the foundation would not hold. Within months, changes in his workplace proved the dream right. The company restructured and his position vanished. While the dream was symbolic, it still prepared him emotionally for the collapse. Nightmares as warnings require us to step into a paradox. We must take them seriously without becoming literalists. This is why Jung considered dream interpretation to be a dialogue rather than a decoding exercise. The unconscious speaks in symbols, metaphors, and sometimes exaggerations. A dream about drowning may not mean you will physically drown, but it may mean you are overwhelmed emotionally, in over your head, in a situation, or cut off from the breath of your own spirit. There's also a spiritual dimension to this. Jung believed that some dreams carry an instinct for survival that transcends personal psychology. In moments of deep crisis, the unconscious can erupt with imagery so powerful that it forces the ego to shift course. A nightmare in which you are warned to leave a place, avoid a person, or change a behavior is not simply the mind playing tricks. It is the deeper self trying to protect the whole organism. The real question is, are we listening? In modern life, we are conditioned to override our instincts in favor of schedules, obligations, and rationalizations. Nightmares cut through that conditioning. They bypass polite hints and instead slam us with imagery we can't ignore. They are the psychic equivalent of a fire alarm, unpleasant, jarring, but absolutely necessary. By the end of his career, Jung was adamant. When a nightmare strikes with unusual intensity or persistence, it deserves your attention. Even if the danger is not literal, there is always something in your life that needs urgent care. The dream's job is not to frighten you into helplessness, but to shake you awake so you can act before it's too late. Nightmares can feel like an endless loop of terror, leaving the dreamer exhausted and anxious. Yet, according to Carl Jung, these very dreams hold the key to profound healing. The unconscious communicates in symbols, and when a nightmare arises, it is often pointing to unresolved conflicts, repressed emotions, or hidden aspects of the self, what Jung called the shadow. Avoiding these dreams may seem like the safer path, but in doing so, the dreamer denies the chance for growth, self-understanding, and transformation. Jung proposed that by confronting the fear in dreams, rather than fleeing from it, we can translate this unconscious wisdom into positive change in waking life. In fact, many symbolic warnings can feel just as urgent as literal ones, and misinterpreting them can lead to confusion. If we assume every dream is a prophecy, we fall into paranoia. If we dismiss them all as meaningless, we risk ignoring a critical signal. The key is discernment, and this is where dream journaling and self-reflection become invaluable tools. Jung often advised looking for life parallels. If a nightmare's imagery connects directly to a situation in waking life, chances are you're dealing with a symbolic warning. If the imagery is oddly specific and tied to physical sensations, smells, tastes, bodily pain, it may be more literal. But either way, the dream is asking for action, whether that action is a doctor's visit or a hard conversation with yourself. Consider another example. A young man named Marcus kept dreaming that he was standing on a stage, about to give a speech, when suddenly the floor beneath him began to crack. He'd watch helplessly as the stage gave way, and he fell into a dark void. Marcus was not afraid of public speaking, nor was he preparing for a speech. But through dream work, he realized the stage symbolized his career, one he had built on external validation rather than authentic passion. The warning was that the foundation would not hold. Within months, changes in his workplace proved the dream right. The company restructured, and his position vanished. While the dream was symbolic, it still prepared him emotionally for the collapse. Nightmares as warnings require us to step into a paradox. We must take them seriously without becoming literalists. This is why Jung considered dream interpretation to be a dialogue rather than a decoding exercise. The unconscious speaks in symbols, metaphors, and sometimes exaggerations. A dream about drowning may not mean you will physically drown, but it may mean you are overwhelmed emotionally, in over your head, in a situation, or cut off from the breath of your own spirit. There's also a spiritual dimension to this. Jung believed that some dreams carry an instinct for survival that transcends personal psychology. In moments of deep crisis, the unconscious can erupt with imagery so powerful that it forces the ego to shift course. A nightmare in which you are warned to leave a place, avoid a person, or change a behavior is not simply the mind playing tricks. It is the deeper self trying to protect the whole organism. The real question is, are we listening? In modern life, we are conditioned to override our instincts in favor of schedules, obligations, and rationalizations. Nightmares cut through that conditioning. They bypass polite hints and instead slam us with imagery we can't ignore. They are the psychic equivalent of a fire alarm, unpleasant, jarring, but absolutely necessary. By the end of his career, Jung was adamant. When a nightmare strikes with unusual intensity or persistence, it deserves your attention. Even if the danger is not literal, there is always something in your life that needs urgent care. The dream's job is not to frighten you into helplessness, but to shake you awake so you can act before it's too late. Nightmares can feel like an endless loop of terror, leaving the dreamer exhausted and anxious. Yet, according to Carl Jung, these very dreams hold the key to profound healing. The unconscious communicates in symbols, and when a nightmare arises, it is often pointing to unresolved conflicts, repressed emotions, or hidden aspects of the self, what Jung called the shadow. Avoiding these dreams may seem like the safer path, but in doing so, the dreamer denies the chance for growth, self-understanding, and transformation. Jung proposed that by confronting the fear in dreams, rather than fleeing from it, we can translate this unconscious wisdom into positive change in waking life. The principle is simple yet powerful. Facing your nightmares diminishes their control over you. When we run from fear, it grows. When we run from fear, it grows. When we meet it intentionally, we discover its meaning and the lessons it carries. Jung saw this process as part of individuation, the journey toward integrating all parts of the psyche into a harmonious whole. Each nightmare, no matter how grotesque or terrifying, contains a fragment of self that wishes to be acknowledged and integrated. Ignoring it leaves that energy unclaimed, often manifesting as anxiety, depression, or inexplicable tension in waking life. One of the most effective ways Jung suggested to work with nightmares is through his technique of active imagination. This practice involves consciously re-engaging with the imagery of the dream while awake, allowing the mind to dialogue with the unconscious safely. Instead of passively recalling the nightmare, the individual revisits it in a controlled setting, asking questions, observing symbols, and even speaking with the characters or elements within the dream. By doing so, the unconscious can reveal deeper truths that were previously hidden behind the veil of fear. To understand how this works, consider a step-by-step approach to confronting a nightmare using active imagination. Recall and record the nightmare. Begin by writing down every detail of the dream. Note the setting, characters, emotions, and specific imagery. The act of recording transforms a fleeting, chaotic memory into a tangible narrative, which you can safely examine. Identify the emotions. Recognize the fear, anger, sadness, or guilt present in the dream. Don't judge these emotions. Simply acknowledge them. They are the guideposts to understanding what part of the self is calling for attention. Re-enter the dream conscious. Sly. In a calm and relaxed state, close your eyes and visualize the dream. Approach it intentionally, knowing you are awake and in control. Imagine stepping into the nightmare with curiosity rather than panic. Engage with the symbols. Dialogue with the dream characters or confront the terrifying imagery. Ask questions like, "Why are you here?" or "What do you want me to understand?" Pay attention to subtle responses, insights, or shifts in the imagery. Integrate insights into waking life. After the session, reflect on what the nightmare revealed. Does it point to suppressed emotions, unresolved conflicts, or aspects of the self you've neglected? Consider concrete steps to address these issues in your waking life. The results of this work can be profound. For example, a woman named Sophia repeatedly dreamed of being chased through dark corridors by a faceless shadow. Initially, the dream left her paralyzed with fear, and she avoided confronting it. Through active imagination, she re-entered the dream consciously, asking the shadow why it pursued her. The figure transformed into a younger version of herself, crying out for attention and validation she had denied as a child. By acknowledging this part of herself, Sophia found greater emotional clarity, reduced anxiety, and began expressing her needs more openly in her relationships. Another case involves a man named David, who experienced recurrent dreams of drowning. Using Jungian techniques, he visualized the water as a symbolic representation of repressed grief over the loss of his father. Engaging with the imagery, he imagined himself swimming through the water rather than being overwhelmed by it. Over time, the dreams became less terrifying, and he reported feeling a new sense of emotional resilience and acceptance in his waking life. Jung emphasized that the purpose of facing nightmares is not simply to eradicate fear, but to integrate the messages and energy of the unconscious into conscious life. The mind has an innate drive toward wholeness, and nightmares are a reflection of that drive. By confronting them, we harness the creative and transformative potential that fear often masks. Interestingly, research in modern psychology supports the idea that confronting nightmares can be therapeutic. Techniques such as imagery, rehearsal therapy, IRT, which involves rewriting a nightmare with a positive ending, show significant reductions in nightmare frequency and intensity. Jungian active imagination parallels this, though it emphasizes dialogue with the unconscious rather than merely altering the outcome. Both approaches share the central principle: empowerment through engagement. Beyond personal growth, facing nightmares also deepens self-compassion. When we confront the most frightening parts of our psyche, we acknowledge that vulnerability and darkness are natural aspects of being human. We learn to hold our fears with curiosity rather than shame, transforming nightmares from sources of suffering into catalysts for self-acceptance and wisdom. Finally, the healing power of nightmares extends to creativity and problem-solving. Many artists, writers, and innovators have credited terrifying dreams with inspiring their work. The unconscious often presents insights in dream imagery before the conscious mind can articulate them logically. By engaging with these symbols, we tap into a rich source of inner guidance that can illuminate our waking choices. So nightmares are not simply terrifying disruptions to our sleep, they are opportunities. Through Jung's active imagination and conscious engagement, we can confront fear safely, decode the messages of the unconscious, and integrate hidden aspects of ours. Elves. The process transforms the nightmare from a source of dread into a profound teacher, offering emotional healing, personal insight, and even creative inspiration. When approached with courage and curiosity, the darkest dreams can become the most illuminating journeys of all. Nightmares are rich with meaning, but unlocking their messages requires more than just remembering them upon the waking. Carl Jung believed that dreams are a direct line to the unconscious, containing symbols and archetypes that communicate truths we may not consciously recognize. However, these messages are often encoded in imagery that can feel cryptic or frightening. To truly benefit from nightmares, we must learn to decode them. Fortunately, there are practical tools inspired by Jungian psychology that can help anyone interpret their dreams with clarity, self-awareness, and transformative insight. One of the most powerful tools is dream journaling. The act of writing down your nightmares immediately after waking captures details that might otherwise fade. Jung emphasized that even small details, a shadow lurking in a corner, the color of a room, the behavior of a dream character, can carry significant symbolic weight. Begin each entry by noting the date, the overall feeling of the dream, and all the elements you remember. Don't censor yourself. Include emotions, sensations, and seemingly trivial objects. Over time, patterns may emerge, highlighting recurring symbols or emotional themes that point to unresolved issues in your waking life. Dream journaling also allows for reflection and comparison, helping you track your progress in confronting and understanding the messages of the unconscious. Once the nightmare is recorded, symbol mapping becomes a crucial next step. Jung argued that dreams communicate through symbols because the unconscious speaks in a language different from conscious logic. Symbols often carry multiple layers of meaning, influenced by personal experiences, cultural context, and universal archetypes. To map your nightmare, identify each prominent symbol and ask yourself what it represents. For instance, water might symbolize emotion, a shadowy figure could represent repressed aspects of the self, and falling might indicate a loss of control or fear of failure. Consider both personal associations, what that symbol means to you, and universal interpretations found in myths or archetypal studies. Drawing connections between symbols can reveal hidden relationships and underlying messages, making the nightmare a map to your inner psyche. Jung also recommended self-reflective questioning after a nightmare. Rather than rushing to dismiss the fear or confusion, ask yourself guiding questions to uncover the deeper meaning. What part of me is this dream trying to show me? Is this fear familiar from my waking life? What unresolved emotion is being expressed here? Does this nightmare point to a personal conflict, a relational issue, or a collective concern? By approaching nightmares with curiosity instead of dread, you shift from being a passive victim of the dream to an active participant in understanding and integrating it. Questions like these foster dialogue between your conscious mind and your unconscious, facilitating insights that can lead to growth, healing, and even creativity. Understanding whether a nightmare relates to the self, others, or the collective unconscious is another key step in interpretation. Jung believed that some dreams are intensely personal, reflecting unresolved emotions, repressed desires, or psychological tensions unique to the dreamer. Other nightmares may involve interpersonal dynamics, bringing up conflicts, misunderstandings, or relational patterns that require attention. Finally, some dreams tap into the collective unconscious, shared human experiences, archetypal fears, or societal anxieties. Recognizing which category your nightmare belongs to helps contextualize its meaning and informs how you might respond in waking life. For example, a dream that repeatedly features themes of apocalypse or societal collapse may reflect collective fears rather than an individual trauma. Conversely, a dream of being chased by a parent-like figure may point directly to unresolved family dynamics. Combining these tools, dream journaling, symbol mapping, reflective questioning, and identifying the scope of the nightmare, creates a comprehensive framework for understanding your dreams. Over time, this practice cultivates a heightened sense of self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and psychological resilience. Many people discover that the very nightmares that once left them paralyzed with fear can, once decoded, illuminate hidden strengths, unresolved wounds, and creative potential. By facing these dreams with patience and curiosity, you turn fear into insight and disorientation into clarity. In practice, consider a recurring nightmare of being lost in a dark forest. Journaling captures the vivid imagery. twisted trees, fog, a distant sound of footsteps. Symbol mapping might reveal that the forest represents uncharted emotions, the fog uncertainty, and the footsteps a sense of external pressure or judgment. Reflective questions could ask, what am I avoiding in my waking life? Or who or what feels like it's pursuing me emotionally? Finally, assessing whether this nightmare relates to personal or collective themes may reveal that the fear of being lost is a personal manifestation of career anxieties combined with societal pressure to succeed. By decoding each layer, the nightmare becomes a guide, highlighting areas of the self that require attention and care. Jung emphasized that this process is not about controlling dreams or eradicating fear, but about integration. Each nightmare is an opportunity to engage with the unconscious, confront disowned aspects of the self, and bring hidden insights into conscious awareness. Tools like journaling, symbol mapping, reflective questioning, and differentiating personal versus collective themes transform nightmares from mere disturbances of sleep into profound instruments for self-discovery. With consistent practice, the fearful imagery of the night evolves into a mirror of inner wisdom, a nightly guide leading toward healing, creativity, and wholeness. By learning to decode your nightmares, you reclaim agency over the unconscious messages that once felt chaotic or threatening. Each dream becomes an invitation to explore the depths of your psyche, confront fears courageously, and harness the transformative power hidden within the darkness. As Jung asserted, nightmares are not punishments, but guides, and with the right tools, they become allies in the journey towards self-understanding and emotional empowerment. Nightmares, once decoded, are not just psychological curiosities. They are powerful guides that can transform waking life. Carl Jung believed that the unconscious communicates through dreams to point out what the conscious mind overlooks, avoids, or misunderstands. However, the true value of a nightmare is realized only when its message is consciously integrated into everyday behavior, choices, and self-awareness. Understanding the symbolism of a dream is one step. Applying that understanding to improve relationships, emotional resilience, and personal growth is where the true transformation occurs. The first step in integrating a nightmare's message is to recognize recurring themes as mirrors of unresolved conflicts or inner tension. For instance, a recurring nightmare about being trapped in a small, dark room may symbolize feelings of limitation, fear of judgment, or suppressed creativity. By acknowledging that the dream reflects a real-life struggle, you can begin to address it proactively. Integration often starts with reflection, journaling the dream, reviewing the symbols, and noting the emotions it evokes. This process transforms a passive experience into an active dialogue with the unconscious. Instead of fearing the nightmare, you approach it as a teacher, a guide showing what needs attention, care, or change. Shadow integration is a key Jungian method for turning nightmare insights into growth. Jung described the shadow as the parts of ourselves we reject, ignore, or fail to recognize, often qualities that provoke fear or guilt. Nightmares frequently bring these disowned aspects to the surface, sometimes in extreme, exaggerated, or frightening forms. To integrate the shadow, you must consciously acknowledge its existence and examine how it manifests in daily life. For example, a nightmare of a violent stranger pursuing you may reflect suppressed anger or unexpressed assertiveness. By consciously exploring how these traits appear in your thoughts, actions, and decisions, you gradually integrate them into your personality, balancing the conscious and unconscious mind. Shadow work, though challenging, allows for a sense of wholeness as you reclaim parts of yourself that were once hidden in fear or denial. Beyond shadow work, nightmares can serve as milestones for personal growth. Each dream can mark a turning point, a signal that a particular aspect of your psyche requires attention. For instance, someone might experience recurring dreams of drowning, symbolizing overwhelming stress or anxiety. By recognizing the pattern, the dreamer can take concrete steps, practicing stress reduction techniques, setting boundaries, or seeking support for emotional burdens. Each small action taken in response to the nightmare becomes a measurable milestone, reinforcing the connection between dream insight and conscious improvement. Over time, the dreamer notices that not only do the nightmares lose their intensity, but the waking life also becomes calmer, more balanced, and more intentional. Storytelling illuminates this integration process beautifully. Consider the case of a young professional who repeatedly dreamt of being lost in a labyrinthine office, chased by faceless colleagues. At first, the dream caused anxiety and disrupted sleep. By journaling the nightmare, mapping the symbols, and reflecting on its meaning, the individual realized it reflected feelings of professional inadequacy, fear of judgment, and avoidance of responsibility. Shadow integration exercises encourage the dreamer to confront these fears in waking life, taking on challenging projects, communicating more openly with colleagues, and addressing feelings of self-doubt. Over months, the recurring nightmare diminished, replaced by more neutral or even empowered dreams. In this way, the nightmare became not a tormentor, but a guide, directing attention to what needed conscious care and action. Practical exercises can further facilitate the integration of nightmare insights. Begin each day by reviewing the previous night's dream, noting emotions and symbols, and asking, "What does this dream want me to notice about myself today?" Visualization techniques, where you mentally revisit the dream in a safe and controlled way, allow you to practice confronting fears or shadow traits consciously. Affirmations or intention setting based on the dream's lesson can reinforce behavioral change. For example, if a nightmare exposes a tendency to avoid confrontation, consciously setting intentions to communicate assertively during the day creates a bridge between dream insight and real-life action. Over time, these exercises strengthen the dialogue between conscious awareness and the unconscious mind. Integration also requires patience and compassion. Nightmares often bring up deeply rooted fears or traumas, and progress may be gradual. Jung emphasized that the process of individuation, the conscious integration of unconscious material, is lifelong. Every dream, particularly a troubling nightmare, provides an opportunity for learning, reflection, and self-improvement. Celebrating small victories, such as reduced anxiety or increased self-awareness, reinforces the value of working with dreams. Rather than viewing nightmares as punishment, you come to see them as allies in personal development. Ultimately, the true gift of nightmare integration is empowerment. By confronting fear, decoding symbols, and practicing shadow integration, nightmares transform from sources of anxiety into tools for self-mastery. They illuminate hidden aspects of the psyche, reveal patterns that impede growth, and offer concrete guidance for living more consciously. Life becomes less reactive and more intentional as you align with the wisdom of your unconscious mind. Nightmares, when understood and integrated, become messengers of potential, guiding the dreamer toward wholeness, resilience, and creativity. They remind us that the unconscious is not a place of chaos, but a wellspring of insight waiting to be harnessed. With consistent practice, journaling, reflection, shadow exercises, and mindful action, the lessons of the night bleed into the day, shaping choices, behaviors, and personal evolution. The darkness of nightmares becomes a mirror, reflecting the path to self-awareness and fulfillment. Nightmares often feel like enemies, terrifying, chaotic, and unwelcome intruders into our sleep. Yet, Carl Jung reminds us that these nocturnal experiences are far from meaningless. They are secret allies, friends in disguise, sent by the unconscious to guide us, illuminate hidden truths, and reveal what our conscious mind may be avoiding. When we learn to approach nightmares not with fear but with curiosity, we uncover a profound wisdom. What we most dread is often the very thing that can teach us the most. The monsters in our dreams, the dark strangers, the labyrinths and chasms, are not there to punish us. They are there to point us toward growth, insight, and self-realization. Your nightmares are mirrors, reflecting the parts of yourself that you may have ignored, repressed, or denied. Each terrifying symbol, each recurring pattern, is a message about your inner world. Jung called this the work of individuation, the process of integrating the conscious and unconscious aspects of the self. Nightmares give us a rare glimpse into what lies beneath the surface. Unacknowledged fears, unresolved conflicts, hidden desires, and the shadow we so often wish to ignore. When approached with awareness, these nocturnal messages are not harbingers of doom, but signposts on the path to wholeness. Directly addressing you, the viewer, what you fear is your greatest teacher. The fears that emerge in your dreams are not random, they are carefully chosen by the unconscious to grab your attention. A nightmare of falling, being chased, or losing someone dear may seem frightening, but its real purpose is to reveal where your mind, heart, or spirit feels unsteady. By reflecting on these dreams, journaling the symbols, and asking yourself what they might represent in your waking life, you can turn fear into knowledge and anxiety into clarity. The courage to face your nightmares, to ask their questions and listen to their guidance, is the same courage that allows you to grow, heal, and transform. Nightmares also teach us self-compassion. It is easy to blame ourselves for having bad dreams, or to feel weak for being frightened by them. Jungian psychology reframes this perspective. A nightmare is not evidence of weakness, but of depth. The more profound your inner life, the more material your unconscious has to communicate. Highly sensitive, reflective, or creative individuals often experience vivid dreams because they perceive and process life at a deeper level. Embracing nightmares as messages rather than punishments allows you to cultivate patience, understanding, and kindness toward yourself. Each dream is an opportunity to practice these qualities in the safe, symbolic space of sleep before carrying them into your waking life. Integration is the key. By decoding your nightmares and applying their lessons consciously, you begin to bridge the gap between your unconscious insights and your everyday decisions. Shadow work, reflection, and active imagination exercises help you confront fears, reclaim disowned aspects of your personality, and release patterns that hold you back. The night becomes a laboratory for personal development, a sacred space where fear transforms into wisdom and terror transforms into empowerment. Each dream successfully integrated strengthens your emotional resilience, sharpens your intuition, and deepens your understanding of yourself. Your nightmares are allies because they encourage courage and self-awareness. They call you to pay attention when you might otherwise ignore the whispers of your psyche. They push you to confront what is uncomfortable, to ask difficult questions, and to embrace the unknown within yourself. In doing so, they foster growth that no easy or painless method could achieve. Every time you face a nightmare consciously, you reclaim power over fear, turning a moment of vulnerability into a stepping stone toward strength. Finally, there is hope in the darkest of dreams. The terror of a nightmare does not define your waking life unless you allow it to. Jung's teachings remind us that the unconscious speaks in symbols, and those symbols, when understood, can illuminate paths to clarity, healing, and fulfillment. Nightmares are not the enemy. They are invitations, urgent yet benevolent, to become more complete, authentic, and courageous. As you practice listening, decoding, and integrating these messages, the night transforms from a place of dread to a realm of possibility, guidance, and wisdom. Remember this: your nightmares are not attacks but guides. What once seemed like torment becomes an ally, a mirror, a teacher, and a friend in disguise. Each frightening dream is a coded message, a call to awareness, a nudge toward growth. The darkness of night carries within it the seeds of light, the potential for understanding, and the power to change your life for the better. By facing your dreams with curiosity, courage, and compassion, you honor both the conscious and unconscious dimensions of your mind, unlocking a deeper relationship with yourself and with the world around you. Nightmares, in their raw, intense, and sometimes shocking way, are sacred messengers. They remind us that true wisdom often comes from embracing what we fear most, that healing comes from integration, and that courage is born in the moments we confront the unknown. As you lie in bed tonight or recall a nightmare from the past, remember, it is not your enemy. It is your secret ally, and by listening to it, understanding it, and acting on its guidance, you step into a life that is richer, fuller, and more deeply aligned with who you truly are.